Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 11, A Deeper Look, Positive Reinforcement Training. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast. We're happy to have you back. This is episode 11, A Deeper Look, Positive Reinforcement Training. I'm Mariano, that's Brent. You can find us at our Instagram pages. Mine is UNTAMEDDOGCO, that's all one word, and Brent is CANISBEHAVIor, again, all one word. So we're excited to have you guys here today. We really want to dissect this and give a more kind of clear understanding from a dog trainer's perspective of what exactly positive reinforcement training is. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to you, Brent.
Cool. Thanks, man. How you been? I miss you.
Pretty good. How are you? I miss you too, man.
I miss you. I wish you didn't live in Arizona all the time. I wish you could come and visit me more.
Is it weird that when we both said I miss you together? And so I was thinking of that song, Kiss Me Through the Phone.
That was a little weird. Kiss me through the phone. Something. Let's get back to work. Anyway.
All right.
Hey, everybody. All right. So today we are talking about positive reinforcement training. As you guys know, me and Mariano, we've been able to work a lot with multidiscipline approaches of dog training. We're huge believers that every dog trainer should definitely be masters of certain fields and philosophies of dog training, but definitely we need to understand and respect all the other formats of dog training. And I think one of the ones that really come up a lot, we hear it all over social media, we hear it all over the dog community, is positive reinforcement training. However, over the last 15, 20 years, the word positive reinforcement has kind of turned into more of a marketing slogan and less of the actual learning theory science that it originated from. So what we want to start off with, let's go ahead and just start off breaking down exactly what positive reinforcement is for those of you guys who it might be unfamiliar to you, because funny enough, it may actually be something slightly different than you thought. Okay. So we talked about this in a couple other podcasts where we talked about B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner is the founder, the godfather of behaviorism, which pretty much was the theory that every living creature learns based off of 4 variables, right? It's things that we get. We work for things that are desirable and we work to avoid things that are undesirable. And so pretty much he broke down the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. One of these quadrants is positive reinforcement. But just to break it down, positive reinforcement is one quadrant, negative reinforcement is another, positive punishment and negative punishment are all 4 quadrants. Now we won't get into the other ones in depth because we're just going to talk about positive reinforcement. But in the original learning theory science, the word positive did not mean to feel good, right? It didn't have this feel good connotation. The word positive literally meant what it means in mathematics, which is to add something to the equation. Now, the word reinforcement means to increase the likelihood that a behavior will happen again in the future, right? So if we reinforce a behavior, we're making sure that the learner understands that should happen again next time, right? So pretty much we are adding something to an equation in order to reinforce to make sure that it happens again. So in essence, in dog training, this is known as the common reward or the common treat, or just the common praise. We're marking that moment in time the dog does something well, and we use motivation as the reinforcer, so that way the dog learns, if I do that behavior again, I get that reinforcer again. Okay. So this is what it meant in science theory. However, over the years, the terminology has kind of been shifted to mean other things. So Mariano, would you mind chiming in a little bit? What do you feel that over the years that the word positive reinforcement has been perceived as by the public?
Yeah, so positive reinforcement has largely become, in the public's eyes, a way to never say no to your dog and never, as someone would see it, never be mean to your dog. And so we talk about positive and negative, as you just said, in a scientific sense, as in I'm adding or taking something away. Most people these days tend to think of positive reinforcement as you're being nice. I'm being positive as opposed to being negative. I'm not being like a Debbie Downer. So one big thing that I notice with positive reinforcement in kind of today's culture is it tends to fall in line a lot with other ideals that we have. And it comes from a good place. I actually just spoke to someone on the phone earlier today, and regarding dog training. And it really comes from an understandable place of, I don't want to do something to my dog that could be perceived as negative.
Right.
And we can understand that wholeheartedly. I think, though, a larger issue from a dog training perspective, and when we did talk about this previously, it was episode 9, I believe, um, responding to the Stuff You Should Know podcast.
Hmm.
It I think a lot of it just stems from people have this idea or this tendency to kind of overhumanize their dogs, and they see, or yeah, overhumanize their dogs. Sorry, and they kind of see their dogs through a lens that's a little bit too human, to the point to where it becomes a bit of a detriment to the dogs, or at least it can.
Right. Right. And I mean, I would even challenge the humanization of dogs, because if you were going to humanize a dog, humans, we learn from positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. That's how we learn as a living species, you know?
I agree in reality, but in my experience, most people that feel this way, like pure positive about their dogs, tend
Mhm.
to feel this way about humans as well.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. Yeah, and I can understand that. I think as a human, we put ourselves as the guardian and as the caretaker of this helpless animal, right?
Right.
So it's kind of like with a kid, right? We're going to be more protected with a kid, but versus an employee or someone that might work for you, or maybe a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend, we have no problem letting them know what we want and what we don't like from them, So, but definitely when we're put in a caretaker position over a helpless creature, uh, the desire to treat it fairly, to treat it right, all of that is going to be there. However, we've seen in some scenario, we'll talk about this a little bit later in the podcast, how uh, there are some downfalls to positive reinforcement training, that can actually have a lifelong, that can cause damage to a dog's life, actually, and not directly, indirectly. Um, okay, so what were you gonna say? Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add really quickly for people listening, I don't necessarily think that there's downfalls to positive reinforcement training in and of itself. The problem is Brent's talking about what people perceive positive reinforcement training to be.
Right.
How that's kind of been a little bit askew from what reality is, that
Mhm.
has downfalls of 100%. And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of it, again, I just thought of an example that kind of helps like iterate my point about people when they're put in a caretaker position, they want good things. They want to take care of the animal, but the problem is that they do it in a way that isn't conducive to the animal.
Mhm.
Whereas when people take care of like horses or like farm animals, they know what they need. No one feels bad because a horse is in a stable or because a horse eats hay, or
Right,
because they
right, right.
understand
Good
this is
point.
what a horse needs. But when it comes to dogs, that's what I mean by they humanize them too much.
Right.
Dogs can live a very healthy life when given exactly what a dog needs to thrive, but people have kind of turned it into this like, let me not be mean to him, let me only shelter him from negative experiences, because that's going to ultimately lead to the highest quality of life possible for him.
Right, right, and that's anthropomorphizing a dog, right? So in essence, putting human emotions and experiences on an animal who is not a human,
Right.
and treating them that way, right? So yeah, totally get it, totally get it. I think one thing that came to my mind right now, so positive reinforcement training in the public's eye has kind of been turned into um, food work. Like if you use food and you use exclusively food or praise, that this tends to make you a positive reinforcement trainer. So I guess I want to give a couple examples of positive reinforcement techniques, right? Those of you guys who may have dabbled in it or may not have known what it is. Here we go. So obviously food work is part of it. Using food as a lure, using food to help shape and reward behaviors. This is the number one place that we start in any positive reinforcement work. Okay. We also use food in positive reinforcement work to develop patience, to develop self control. In essence, we use food as a way to motivate the dog to wait certain 1 second durations, 3 second durations, 5 second durations before getting another reward, right? So we get the dog to anticipate a rewarding process so that they learn to wait their turn or be patient. And we see it works really, really well with young puppies. We see it really work really, really well when there's not a lot of distractions. So it is definitely one of the best ways to shape behaviors. Other ways that people might use food, they might use it for developing targets, right? And also we can use food to actually associate positive meanings to things that might be unrelated to the dog. So for example, like a clicker, a verbal marker. Some people will use targets, as I mentioned, like they'll use poles. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen aquatic animals, dolphin training, whale training. They'll actually have targets like on the end of a stick, and they teach the dolphin, if they tap it with their nose, then they get a fish for it, right? So positive reinforcement work has a lot of different uses. And I do agree in that it is one of the best ways for starting to shape new behaviors, right? Because what I've learned over the years is listening in the way that we want dogs to listen is not really a natural thing for most dogs, let alone animals in general, right? So teaching a dog to heel, like dogs don't heel in the wild, or they don't heel out of instinct. So there's a lot of things that we are teaching the dogs that are very specifically based on our human experience and our human life with them.
Yeah, and it's funny, the way that we typically like to explain things in terms of dog training to a client is it's our job to understand where the dog is coming from, but also understand where you're coming from and kind of meet you guys in the middle and come to some sort of understanding. So dog training a lot of times can feel like a liaison,
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about dogs don't heel in the wild, dogs don't, really care much about sitting and laying down on command in the wild. So the reason why positive reinforcement has such an important place in training dogs, because I agree with you that it's definitely one of the most efficient, most effective ways of shaping new behaviors, is when we talk about dog training overall, or we talk about just dog behavior overall. Dogs who aren't in the wild, they're living in domestic settings and they're having to live by rules that aren't necessarily like innately understood by dogs because they just weren't formulated with them in mind. They have certain tendencies, certain urges that don't make sense all the time, like barking at the mailman, chasing a
Yeah.
squirrel. And so what we're dealing with there, these things that no one had to teach the dog. No one teaches dogs to bark at them. Oh, maybe someone does, but most people don't teach dogs to bark at the mailman.
Mm-hmm.
Dogs do it because it's an internal drive. It's something that they already love. And dogs don't naturally just love sitting and laying down, but with
Mm-hmm.
work, you can incentivize these things and you can make a cue, like you were saying. It could be a marker, be it a clicker or a word, and you reward when they do these things. You build incentive, you build work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
These things can become valuable. It can become rivalrous
Mm-hmm.
to going after the mailman. So it can be like bark, bark, bark. No, 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 come, sit down, stay. And the
Exactly.
dog goes, oh, sure, I'll take it, because it's just as valuable, if not more.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in positive reinforcement, the biggest thing here is, and we will do another video in higher forms of motivation work, but usually we have to find something that the dog really loves. And sometimes dogs like food, and sometimes dogs don't like food. So we might have to find a different motivator. It could be a toy, it could be a squeaker. But then there is also something that comes up that's called real life rewards, right? The dog human experience and the dog owner experience. There are so many points in a dog's life where, like in the dog's day to day, where we are rewarding them without necessarily knowing, right? So when we feed them their breakfast, that's technically a reward, right? When we go for that walk, that's technically a reward. When we let them jump on the couch and give them belly rubs, that's technically could be used as a motivational tool, right? So there's all these little things that we just do as humans who own dogs and hang out with dogs on a regular basis, that sometimes what we see is people aren't leveraging some of the other types of rewards, and they tend to only focus on food, right? And the issue with that is not always is food on a person, right? To be able to reward those. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We'll see you next time.